Chapter 1. Conflict between religious and political principles is one of the most remarkable phenomena of our time. When discord once appears in the sphere of religious and spiritual principles, it is impossible to predict by what limits it will be confined, what elements it will involve, and whither will flow the stream of passions aroused by the clash of convictions and beliefs. Where the religious convictions of a people are concerned, it is essential that the state shall establish its demands and regulations with especial caution to avoid such collision with their sentiments and spiritual necessities as would be resented by the masses. For however powerful the state may be, its power is based alone upon identity of religious profession with the people. The faith of the people sustains it. When discord once appears to weaken this identity, its foundations are sapped. Its power dissolves away. In spiritual sympathy with its rulers, a people may bear many heavy burdens, may concede much, and surrender many of its privileges and rights. In one domain alone, the state must not demand concession or the people concede, and that is the domain where every believer and all together sink the foundations of their spiritual existence and bind themselves with eternity. There are depths in this domain to which the secular power dare not and must not descend, lest it strike at the roots of faith in each and all. The prime cause of the misunderstandings which now exist and which threaten to increase between the people and its rulers is the artificial theory popularly held of the relations of church to state. In the course of events in Western Europe, events indissolubly bound up with the development of the Roman Catholic Church, there originated and took root as an element in political construction the idea of the church as a religious and political institution with a power which, in opposition to the state, carried on with it a political conflict, the incidents of which crowd the pages of history in Western Europe. Quote, this conception of the political mission of the church has driven into the background its simple, true, and natural conception as a congregation of Christians organically bound by identity of faith in divine alliance, end quote. Yet this innate conception lies concealed in the depths of the popular conscience, corresponding with the essential aspiration of the human soul, the aspiration to faith and identity of faith with others. In this sense, the church as a community of believers cannot and must not detach itself from the state as a society united by a civil bond. Whatever perfection theories based on the separation of church and state may attain in the minds of logicians, they do not satisfy the simple sentiments of the mass of believers. They may indeed content the political mind, which sees in them the best of all possible compromises and a perfect construction of philosophical ideas, but in the depths of the soul, which feels the living necessity of faith and of unity of faith with life, these artificial theories are irreconcilable with truth. The spiritual life needs and seeks above all things spiritual unity. To this it aspires as the ideal of its existence. But when this ideal is realized in duality, it scorns to accept it and turns away. By its nature, faith is uncompromising and tolerates no accommodations in its ideals. it is true that the actual life of all and each of us is an uninterrupted history of failure and duality, of melancholy discord between thought and work, between faith and life. But in this ceaseless struggle, the human soul is sustained by nothing so much as by faith in an ideal ultimate unity, a faith which it cherishes as the strongest sanctuary of existence. Reduce a believer to the recognition of this duality, he will be humiliated. Reveal to him that end of all duality to which his soul aspires, he lifts his head, he feels his life renewed, and marches onward armed with faith. Tell him that life and faith are independent of one another, and his soul rejects the thought with the abhorrence with which it would reject the thought of ultimate annihilation. It may be objected that this is a question of personal belief, but the faith of individuals can in no way be distinguished from the faith of the Church, for its essential need is community, and of this need it finds satisfaction only in the Church. The struggle between Church and State in Western Europe has now endured for many years. The last word in this struggle has not yet been spoken, and what that word will be is still unknown. Each party still measures its strength and assembles its forces around it. The state relies upon the forces of intelligence. The Church relies upon the faith of the people and upon the recognition of its spiritual authority. There can be no doubt that in the end the victory will belong to that party which displays the most perfect unity in a living and spiritual faith. The intelligence of the partisans of the state is in any case confronted with a delicate task, the task of alluring to its side and binding with it in firm alliance the popular faith. But to gain the sympathy and alliance of faith, intelligence alone is vain. The state must show in itself a living faith. And then a line of Latin, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. The popular mind is suspicious and may not be seduced by appearances of faith or drawn by compromise. For the living faith accepts no compromise and rejects the authority of rational logic, though faith is vulgarly considered as identical with conviction. The conviction of reason must not be confounded with the conviction of faith, and the forces of intellect are sadly mistaken if they assume in themselves the necessary elements of spiritual force, independently of faith, which is their very essence. This confusion of ideas is a great danger to the state in its struggle with the Church. When at the time of the Reformation in Germany, the state set itself at the head of the movement against the old ecclesiastical power and built a new organization for the Church, it possessed actually the spiritual force of faith. The movement which it led had its origin among the people. It was animated by the deepest and strongest faith. Its first leaders represented the highest intelligence of the community and glowed with the fire of a sincere faith uniting them with the people. Thus, in this movement were concentrated immense spiritual forces which, after many years of struggle, compelled the surrender of the ancient faith. Today, conditions differ altogether. From the side of the state, discord has arisen between the religion of the people and the political organization of the Church. From the other quarter of intelligence has sprung a still more striking disunion between religion and its scientific construction. Theological science, no longer restricted to its original function of studying and comprehending religious beliefs, threatens to absorb all beliefs by submitting it as a phenomenon and external object of investigation to the unsparing critical analysis of reason. Political science has established a carefully elaborated doctrine of the definite severance of church and state, in consequence of which By the operation of a law admitting no division of supreme power, the Church inevitably appears as an institution, subordinate to the state. Together with this, the state appears, according to the new conception, as an institution detached from every religion and indifferent to all. It is natural that from this point of view, the Church appears merely as an institution satisfying one of the needs of the population recognized by the state, namely the need of religion. And the modern state, while exercising over this institution control and supervision, in no way troubles about religion itself. For the state, as a supreme political institution, such a theory is attractive. It assures it complete autonomy, the elimination of opposition, and the simplification of all the operations of its ecclesiastical policy. But such assurances are delusive, for this theory, he's talking about just church-state separation, I believe. For this theory, evolved in the studies of ministers and scholars, the conscience of the people will not accept. In all that relates to religion, the masses demand simplicity and completeness, which satisfy their minds, and they reject all artificial ideas, instinctively discerning their diversity from truth. Political theorists will accept the retention of their offices by priests and professors who, as unhappily often occurs in Germany, publicly declare their disbelief in the divinity of our Savior. I'm going to read that again. Political theorists will accept the retention of their offices by priests and professors who publicly declare their disbelief in the divinity of our Savior. The conscience of the people will never accept such an interpretation of the priestly office, but will reject it with abhorrence as a falsehood. Unhappy and hopeless is the position of the ruling power when in its disposition in matters of religion the masses everywhere detect falsehood and infidelity. Chapter 2. The separation of church and state was treated remarkably by the ex-priest Hyacinth in his public lectures delivered in Geneva in the spring of 1863 war to the knife with the church. This is the fancy of the Revolutionary Party, or at least of its extreme representatives, who in politics call themselves Jacobins, and in the domain of religious ideas propagate materialism and infidelity. These men are armed with two weapons, sophistry and violence. They have long lost the confidence of men. They are blind. They lack the strength to continue the struggle because they confound all among their adversaries, distinguish nothing, and exaggerate beyond measure their importance. The aim of the French Revolution was to regenerate society, but regeneration could only succeed through the application to civil society of Christian principles. A struggle began between the Revolution and the Roman theocracy, for the Revolution confounded this theocracy with the Catholic Church, the universe which surrounds all believing Christians, the Evangel itself, and the person of Christ. Confounded these together. Confounded the theocracy with the Catholic Church, the universe which surrounds all believing Christians, the Evangel itself, and the person of Christ. Thus war was declared not only with Rome, but with the kingdom of Christ on earth. In the heart of Christendom, these men began to persecute the very religious feeling which for nigh 2,000 years had been inseparably associated with Christianity. Such was the adversary they challenged to battle, arming themselves with two weapons, base and dishonored both, the axe of the headsman and the living word of the sophist. Thanks to the Abbe freethinkers who thronged the court, thanks to the admitted levity of contemporary morals, Catholicism in France was in an evil state. Suddenly it was summoned, awakened, and dragged to prison. In its name ascended the scaffold priests, young girls, and peasants, side by side with distinguished nobles, with poets, and with statesmen, as in the epoch of the early Caesars. Till then its robes had been stained by the blood of St. Bartholomew's Night, and traces of parents' and orphans' tears caused by the revocation of the Edict of Nantes, or Nantes, whatever French. Yet all these traces were suddenly effaced. Nothing was seen save the blood from its own veins, the traces of its own tears. From this the Church soon arose again to a great and stainless glory. For this glory her executioners had prepared her. Thus acted the sophist philosophers also. They opened questions which modern science declares insoluble. They unveiled the secrets of death, seeing in it only fantasy and delusion. They strove to pierce to the origin of humanity, and instead of the Adam of our Bibles, called to its cradle some unknown being slowly developed from animal life, an ape at first, and then a man. Having placed this man, both as to his origin and as to his end, in an animal medium, having degraded him to the limits of corruption, they changed their tone and began to glorify his greatness. "How great art thou, man!" they cried. "How great art thou in thy atheism, and in thy materialism, and in thy freedom, submitting to nothing in morals!" But in the glory of this strange greatness, man seemed crushed with grief. He had forsaken God, but he kept the need of religion. So imperious is this need that religion may exist even without God. Such is Buddhism, a religion numbering its millions of adherents. But what if it were true that man first sprang from an animal matter? This in no way changes the case of faith. In the book of Genesis, man was made from a material baser still, mud and dust, a handful of earth. It is not the envelope that makes the man. He took from his Creator a living soul, a breath of religious and moral life, of which, whatever he may wish, he cannot be rid. And this forbids him ever to cut himself loose from the Christian religion. The Church must be separated from the state, we are told. These are only words, expressing no distinct idea, for the word separation may express many things. We must first understand in what the separation consists. If it consists in the clear delimitation of religious and secular society, a sincere and permanent delimitation effected without craft or violence, all men will approve of such separation. If, from a practical standpoint, it is demanded that the state shall abdicate its right of appointing the ministers of the Church and shall repudiate its responsibility for their maintenance, the concession of this demand would establish a most desirable and ideal state of affairs, for which it is necessary to prepare under favorable circumstances and in legal form. When this question matures, the state, if it wishes so to decide it, is bound to restore to the proper parties the right to elect priests and bishops. In such case, it will be impossible to surrender to the Pope that which belongs to the clergy and to the people by historical and apostolic right. The state is merely depository of this right, which in no way belongs to it. We are told that this separation is to be understood in the widest sense. Able and learned men define it thus: the state has no concern with the Church, or the Church with the state. Thus humanity is to revolve in two great circles. In one circle will be the body, in the other the soul, and between these circles will be a void as between heaven and earth. But this is impossible. The body cannot separate itself from its soul. Soul and body live a single life. Can we expect that the Church, I do not speak of the Catholic Church in particular, but of the universal Church, will consent to abdicate its interest in civil society, in family society, human society, all, in short, that is understood by the state? Since when has it been supposed that the function of the church is to train ascetics, to people monasteries, to display in temples the poetry of its ceremonies and processions? No, these are but a little part of the duties entrusted to the church. To it was appointed another mission, to teach all peoples. That is its work. Its duty is to train the peoples of the earth, that from the midst of the earthly city and earthly family they may be not altogether unworthy to step into the heavenly city and the heavenly communion. At birth, at marriage, at death, in the supreme moments of human existence, the Church appears with its 3 solemn sacraments. And yet, we are told that the Church has no concern with family life. Its duty is to inspire the people with respect for the law and for power, and to inspire in power respect for human freedom. Yet we are told that the church has no concern with society. No, the moral principle is indivisible. It cannot be apportioned to provide one system of morals for individuals, another for society, one for the body, another for the soul. In a single moral principle are embraced all the relations of life, personal, domestic, and political. And no such church, which retains the consciousness of its own worthiness, will ever surrender its lawful influence on the family or on civil society. To demand that the church shall abstain from intervention in civil affairs is scarcely to give it new strength. The state, we are told, has no concern with the church. Civil society was first established on the basis of the primitive family, every head of a family being a citizen. In that age, the society of believers was indistinguishable from the family, or from the entire people. In the course of time, the structure of civil society was perfected, and a universal Christianity arose, embracing both families and people. How can we justly say to the father and the citizen, you and the church are independent of one another? Unhappily, both father and citizen have long ago said this to themselves. The father has grown indifferent to the tendencies and sentiments of religion in his family circle. He can find no answer when his wife turns to him with her doubts, when his child, with childish simplicity, asks, "Who is this God? And why dost thou not pray to him? And what is this death that comes and bears children away?" If the father answers nothing to these questions, what answer will the child devise? And if the father finds an answer, the child hears in it a fable and not the voice of the living faith. The consequence is that children become skeptical as their fathers, or superstitious as their mothers and their confessors. Thus operates the separation of the church and state in the family circle. In the place of the father is introduced into the house a strange priest, in the capacity of a spiritual guide and the guardian of consciences under aspect of a teacher. For this the priests without doubt are to be blamed, but still more guilty are the parents for permitting the priest to take their places at the domestic hearth. With these conditions, the citizens and the civil power must not be surprised if the edifice they have erected tumbles and crushes them with its ruins. Such is the consequence of the separation of church and state.